In this edition of Art Rocks, David Horton paints worlds of colour, icon and allegory.
I began to look around me to find out how I could use symbols or create my own symbol structure.
Ken Burns shares his process.
Because finally these words that have just been cold type on a page suddenly have meaning.
Theatrical look at history.
Everyone had their own story about August Wilson, especially as his fame grew, so did the stories.
And fine dancing knows no age.
I think it's a self-discipline thing. Mostly you're dancing against yourself.
It's all ahead on this edition of Art Rocks.
Art Rocks is made possible by the Foundation for Excellence in Louisiana Public Broadcasting and by viewers like you.
Hi, I'm James Fox-Smith, publisher of Country Roads magazine, and this is Art Rocks. Joining me in the studio today is Baton Rouge artist David Horton. David, thanks so much for being here today.
Oh, it's a really great pleasure to be here. Thank you.
You were born in New York but raised in Louisiana, and an artist really from the very word go, receiving your first commission at the age of 13. Now, you had your formal training at LSU, but it really was an uncle who fanned the flame.
I was very close to him from an early age. He was my mother's youngest brother and one of the most preeminent watercolorists in Mississippi. His name is Bob Dunaway, and he gave me materials and encouragement, and overall made me feel that artists had a special place in the world.
Now, you describe your style as narrative magical realism, and you don't mind being labeled a narrative painter. Can you talk about your style and how it evolved?
Very, very early on, I was attracted to satire, cartooning, political cartooning, and storytelling. For a long time, I wanted to be a author, short stories. Never really cared much about novels, but poetry and short stories I wrote for many years. And so my painting is kind of an offshoot of that, trying to present a situation or an image that would tell an underlying story.
Foreign travel was a key influence, wasn't it? You spent a good bit of time in Paris in the early 80s and then also in Spain. Please talk a little about how that foreign travel experience has made your work change.
The French experience, I was able to have studios in Paris and in Provence over several years. And it was a new world for me in terms of seeing how people interact in a different culture than ours. The French influence lasted many years, and it resulted in mostly interior and a little bit darker interaction among the figures in the paintings. However, in 1990, I had the opportunity to take a studio in Spain, southern Spain on the coast, right around the Costa Blanca. And the colors and the people and the culture was so radically different from anything I'd experienced in Paris. I always thought of Paris in terms of monochromes, and of course Spain was completely polychromed everywhere. The blues, the purples, and the brilliant, brilliant whites. And my technique evolved by looking at the murals. Even in this small town, had many, many murals painted on the sides of these white stucco buildings. And that was something that I had never experienced before.
There are many stories to tell here. How have the stories that you tell evolved over the years?
When I first got back from Spain, most of the stories were borderline mythological. They contained icons and creatures and figures and objects that I gleaned from learning about ancient symbols. I began to look around me to find out how I could use symbols or create my own symbol structure to express or kind of explain concepts of what happens either in society or among groups of people or between two people. And so using new icons gathered from South Louisiana and other places, that's where my work has been going for a number of years.
Fish, rabbits, boats, flowers that shed petals. Icons and symbols appear in your work over and over again, strange, fantastical creatures. How does the symbolism in your work hold the key to understanding the world those creatures inhabit?
Well, I think a lot of who we are the things that are imprinted on us early in our lives as children. I was always out in the field, in the woods, in and around the bayous. These creatures are things I just became very, very familiar with. They were just part of my daily existence. And so, knowing what they meant to our culture, particularly in Louisiana, I was able to attach certain meanings to these things that some of the meanings had origins going back a couple of thousand years. Some of them were origins that in what I experienced of the icon. One example might be the rabbit. Now, we've always heard the term, wild hare. Well, it's spelled H-A-R-E, and it's meant to imply the kind of insanity that rabbits have in the field when we observe them. I mean, they tend to run to and fro. And then coming back to literature, the March hare. So I attached a meaning to that of kind of an impulsive, small insanity, and I use it in that context within the paintings.
How about Louisiana? How is the landscape and environment of your homeland manifested in your work?
The culture is unique, as we know, in the United States, and as a result, we have a lot of things that can be translated into art. Things that we feel are important here, such as food, joy of living through dance, music, and taking that kind of attitude and trying to infuse that in the painting, I've found that people find it something they can relate to.
There are rich and magical worlds that are available to the viewer the deeper that they look into your painting, and it's been such a pleasure to be able to experience a little of what we see through your eyes. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
New work by David Horton is featured in the October issue of Country Roads magazine. Pick up a copy to read more or go to our website at countryroadsmag.com. In October, LPB becomes an art gallery for the annual Art and Travel Auction. The public is invited to browse the selection in person at our Baton Rouge studios, or you can view the work of contributing artists and craftspeople by visiting the website at lpb.org/auction to view all of the items offered. Each entry is available for a buy it now price, or you may bid on an item up until October 22nd, when the 3-hour live auction finale is broadcast. Now let's take a look at some of Louisiana's arts and cultural events in the coming week. For more information on these events, visit the website at lpb.org/artrocks, and for more arts activities, check out countryroadsmag.com. Filmmaker Ken Burns has more than 30 historical documentaries to his credit. In an industry where a quick pace and computer-generated realities are pervasive, Burns' films rely on thoughtfully related facts and archival photographs. Reporter Carrie Saldo spoke with Burns about his unique approach to the craft.
Ken Burns, welcome back to Denver.
Thank you. It's great to be back.
I've heard you say that all of your films, love is very important to the work.
Love is hard to talk about for most people. The bigger thing is that none of us are making it out of this alive. Every human being thinks that an exception's going to be made in their case and they're going to live forever. And what human beings do to keep the wolf at the door, the wolf being the absolute knowledge and certainty of our mortality, is we tell stories, we create art, we invent structures to give us immortality, religious structures, spiritual structures, all sorts of things. We make children. You know, Jerry Seinfeld said they're here to replace us, but they're our immortality. And these are really good things, and all of those things that I mentioned have at the heart of them, in art, in faith, in family, is love.
Let's talk about craft a little bit, if you will. The craft of documentary filmmaking. How has the art of this medium evolved for you?
Well, for me, I hope I get better at each film, and that's all it really is. I'm more interested in process, as I think any real artist would tell you that. It's very nice to sit and talk about a finished film, but I'm working on 6 other films, and they're the ones that aren't complete yet, and they're the ones where the ideas are happening. And every time you're confronted in any art, but certainly in documentary, with a project, you have lots of tools at your disposal. Those are techniques. If you authentically apply techniques, you have a style. If people say that there's a Ken Burns style, it only means that I'm sort of doing the thing I should be doing, and you can like or dislike, it doesn't really matter, but there's a kind of continuity, and I have to be truthful to myself.
I've read that script writing, the research process for you, goes on throughout the process. There's not really like a firm stop point for you.
Here's the problem. A lot of models that I've seen is that there's a research period that's finite, that then produces a writing period that's finite, and whatever's finished is sort of engraven in stone, and then the shooting and the editing is informed by that thing. Well, we never stop researching, and we never stop writing. And it means that even though I employ really extraordinarily talented writers, and it's a very great give and take in the editing room, in which I'm adding and other people are adding to it, we're never done. There's not a sense of ego about it, like I've just written the perfect sentence and we're leaving it alone. It's a process, and that means the films are open and corrigible. They're not sort of me telling you what you should know. Rather, it's me sharing with you a process of my discovery, saying, hey, you'll never guess what I found out about the Roosevelts, or about the Civil War, or about jazz, whatever it is.
So in that process for you, with the open-endedness in which you work, then direction and images, and how does it all then layer together?
So what happens is that if you're open, then story speaks to you. I'm just a storyteller, and telling a good story is hard to do. You really have to work at it, and it's something that's very complicated. But if you're open to it, it'll speak to you. And sometimes, there's rigidity, and we get into formula, and that's a terrible, terrible quicksand. It's a terrible trap, and formula is the death of anything original. And what you want to do is see if you can find within the form you work at. If it's Chuck Jones, it's a cartoon that lasts a certain amount of time. If it's me, it's a historical documentary. It doesn't really matter. It's the painter's frame, the photographer's frame, the stage of the playwright, whatever it might be.
Thinking about history for you and the ways that you have crossed it again and again, as you continue to revisit a similar point in history, how do you see that framework? Are you discovering something new every time?
Every time. And so I think that when you take each subject, if you say jazz, well, there's a certain path that you follow through. It's not predictable, it's new, it's exciting. Same with Prohibition, same with the Dust Bowl, same with the Roosevelt, same with baseball, same with anything that I've done that's gone through the 1920s. And every 1920s is different from the other. There's overlapping things. You may be hearing the same soundtrack in a couple of those films, or maybe not. It just reminds you to have a little bit of humility. We tend to, from our position here, just so go, oh yeah, I get it. I know what it is about. Oh, this is, and we label something, and I always find it's a lot more complicated than we think. And I like having different views of those times. Voices
are so important in your work. It helps to move the story along.
I'm very much part of a vanguard that said the third person narrator, the voice of God, it's called, isn't enough, that you needed to mix it up with other commentary, both on camera, but first-person voices reading diaries and letters. I think it's a huge thing. It's central to most of the films I've made, because finally these words that have just been cold type on a page suddenly have meaning.
What can art do?
In art, there's a kind of sense of the imparting of something that we can share. And it's a distillation and a way of seeing, of framing these chaotic events. And so you're basically love, taking it and moving it from one person to another. Their molecules are being rearranged, and that's not a bad profession to be involved in.
I don't think so at all. Well, Ken Burns, thank you so much.
It's my pleasure.
Award-winning playwright August Wilson chronicles the struggles and joys of African Americans in his works. We now take a closer look at Wilson's life through the making of American masters August Wilson, The Ground on Which I Stand.
His rise to Broadway was as unlikely as it was unusual. Unapologetically devoted to his art, uncompromisingly grounded in the belief that ordinary black life was ennobled with gifts of blood, of memory, of history. He would create an epic body of work, 10 plays that would go on to win a Tony Award, 2 Pulitzers, launch the careers of countless actors, and earn the honor of having a Broadway theater named after him. His birth name was Frederick August Kittle, but to the world, he was known as August Wilson.
It's seen, many years ago, I had seen 2 of his plays on Broadway, Ma Rainey's Black Bottom and Fences. I had seen those plays. I had not seen the other plays. That's not true, I'd seen A Piano Lesson also on Broadway. But the other ones I hadn't seen. I knew about them, I had not seen them, and I didn't really know much more about Wilson's life than what I had read, when I was doing some research on some other projects or something about actors or playwrights. So I didn't really know a lot. So when Darrell Ford Williams approached me, I guess now it's 2012, about coming on board to direct the Wilson film, then I dived in and started to really do some very intense research, understanding who August Wilson was, where he came from, and the whole Hill District section of his life in Pittsburgh.
Everyone had their own story about August Wilson, especially as his fame grew, so did the stories, so everyone would say, oh yeah, well, I worked with him when he was a dishwasher at such and such a diner, or yeah, I knew him, I would see him at a legendary place called the Crawford Grill. Yeah, I'd see him in the corner scribbling, and nobody knew what he was scribbling about. He'd just sit there for hours smoking and scribbling. So you'd hear these stories, and I just found it fascinating.
August would have accomplished something that no other playwright has done in the history of the world. Write 10 plays about a specific people, one for each decade of a century. Never been done.
I always say that the most exciting thing about working on documentaries is really the research part. Is when you start to do the investigation into a person's life. When you start to meet, his sister or his niece and nephew, or you spend time with his widow, Costanza, and she took us to his archive, and we spent time going through those boxes of all his material, all the stuff he had handwritten, little things on napkins, on paper plates, pieces of his plays that he would write, because he was always creating. So to me, the most important part of the documentary process really is the research, really is the getting to know the people who knew him.
Things that you may not know from a person who sits in a corner scribbling and smoking is that he was a funny guy. He was a jokester, he had a great sense of humor. He loved to talk sports. He was very compassionate. People who were underserved or who looked like they needed a little help. He was very generous of spirit.
He had a special place in their house in Seattle where he would work. And he had the typewriter, or at this point of his career, computer. He'd have it set up, and he would circle it. He wouldn't just go straight to it. He would sort of circle it, and circle it, and circle it. It was part of a ritual. And then he would sit down, and he would begin the process of working. He'd work a few hours, and then he would stop, and the next day he would do the same thing again. He had a process, a ritual, which I find is a wonderful thing to understand about an artist, a craftsperson, is that we all have rituals that inform how we approach our craft.
There are issues that one would think we have passed, that we really haven't. And it's actually his gift to us to have a look back that he provided theatrically to those things that are contemporary and real in our everyday lives.
Now let's take a moment to examine another Louisiana treasure. At the intersection of history and theatre, you'll find historic reenactors.
Only a small part of our historic record exists in photographs and film. So much of our understanding of the past is based upon written accounts. Major events could merit an artist's engraving, while artifacts leave a semblance of the tools and clothing from an earlier age. Many historic homes on display to the public utilize museum theater by presenting docents in period dress. They may take on the role of a character from history to explain or contrast the social manners and expectations of a different time. Perhaps the most dramatic of historic reenactments are those commemorating historic battles. The Civil War was a tumultuous time in Louisiana, with several major battles fought throughout the state. Hundreds of reenactors from all over the country participate when these historic battles are staged, each actor bringing their own weapons and 19th century costumes. From an even earlier time period, the Battle of New Orleans, fought against the British in January of 1815, is the subject of regular reenactments. The battlefield, located in Chalmette, Louisiana, is today part of the Jean Lafitte National Historical Park. These theatrical events enhance the ability to learn what could be a dry subject. Through the efforts of actors and actresses, most of them volunteers, the human desire to tell stories, interact with one another, appreciate music and dance, are all used to bring history to life and gives us the opportunity to better understand our ancestors.
In our final segment, we head to the largest ballroom dance competition in the world, held in Columbus, Ohio. We get a behind-the-scenes look at the Ohio Star Ball, where senior competitors prove that they've still got it. Learn how dance can boost energy and offer a physical and mental challenge to dancers of all ages.
I didn't start dancing until I was 69 years old.
Barbara's been with me for 2 years, and last year we went to the World Championships for the senior division, and she won the World Championships in American Smooth and American Rhythm.
I like a lot of dramatic dances, like the tango, the paso. I like those because it's a character kind of a dance.
Ohio Star Ball is the largest competition literally in the world, and it's held in Columbus, Ohio. We start at 7 o'clock in the morning and go until midnight the entire week. So on any given dance floor, you can have multiple levels, multiple age groups. That's what's confusing to most people, and they think that everybody on the floor is dancing against each other, when they're just bracketed, and the judges have sheets that show what the brackets are and who's competing against each other. Each dance has its own storyline, its own character. The moment you're done with one dance, you immediately have to concentrate on the next one you're going to. As you're walking to your next location, you already have to be putting into a mindset of that storyline of that dance. Come on!
I think it's a self-discipline thing. Mostly you're dancing against yourself. I'm very, very competitive against me.
The number one thing judges look for is posture. A really good competitive dancer loves to work on technique. Technique is the one that's your quality control. So the better your technique is, the better your keep in motion, the better your understanding of how your feet move, then how your entire body moves.
Oh, I love dress up. Just love dress up. I didn't do it much as a kid, but I can do it now as an adult, and I love it.
Dancing is 50% dancing and 50% fashion show.
The gowns are fascinating, and it's really hard to walk through the vendors and not try on some dresses.
So when you go to a dance competition, the ball gowns and the Latin costumes, they're one-of-a-kind dresses, they're couture dresses. They range anywhere from $1,500 to $5,000, $6,000. So Margaret's been dancing since 1985. She's worked her way through the bronze, the silver, and now she's into the gold level of dancing. And Margaret has won a top gold student there 2 to 3 years now.
Once I started taking lessons, I really enjoyed it. I found it was a lot of fun, and you're building up your strength and your endurance as you're dancing all along. So you're in better shape for your age than people who don't dance.
It's challenging, and I think you need a challenge no matter what age you are. And I think as you get older, you kind of lose that drive, and dancing gives you that drive to challenge yourself. And I like that.
So anybody at any level, any age can learn to dance. My youngest student right now is 5 years old. My oldest student I've ever taught was 94. But once you get into ballroom dancing, you're hooked for life.
Get off the couch. Anybody can do it. And if you have no sense of time, your teacher will give you the sense of time.
As I say, it's an addiction. I'll warn you right now.
People who just have a love of life become really good competitive dancers because they're just dancers and they have a good time. That's the most important part that shows across on a dance floor.
And the jive. Thank you, competitors. Nice round of applause for our couple, ladies and gentlemen. Judges, coming up now is...
That's it for this edition of Art Rocks. Don't forget to visit our website at lpb.org/artrocks, where you'll find feature videos and information on upcoming arts events. Until next time, I'm James Fox Smith, and thanks for watching.